Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brian Witt and I am a member of the Environmental Sustainability Board, and I am your host for today's Learning Academy about recycling. This is actually the second of our Learning Academies we've had. The first one was on solar power, and I just want to walk you through this in case you missed it. This one, or if you have someone that wasn't able to make it today or you missed the Solar Academy, I'm going to show you how you can watch that, because these are all on video. So if I'm going to go to the, let's see. Oh, I think that's the screen we're on, the PowerPoint. Let's see. No. Whoop. Share. No. I'm working my way through. Shanna, what do you see right now? The presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the Bel Air website. You're going to go to City Services, and then right here where you see Departments, you're going to scroll down and you're going to go to Public Works. You click on Public Works, and then you scroll down a little bit further and you're going to see the ESB Learning Academy. And it's at this point, you click on that, and you can scroll down. And here is the presentation about solar power. So if you missed that and you want to watch it, here's where you can do it. It's very easily just a couple of clicks. Having gotten that out of the way, let's see, we're going to go back to the presentation. Again, this is about curbside recycling. We're really excited to have Shanna Lopez. She works with Waste Management, and the great thing is Waste Management is the one that picks up our recycling at Bel Air. So the goal for today is to talk about the kind of status of recycling, where we're at, what's valuable, what's not, and just kind of give you an idea how the city of Bel Air is doing. So here with that, I will go ahead and turn this over to Shana.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Brian, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. So as Brian mentioned, I'm Shanna Lopez. I'm the public sector manager for Waste Management. So I actually handle city accounts, and Bel Air is one of my territories. So I work with cities to talk about kind of what's happening with their recycling program, what can be recycled, contamination levels, and really keeping the program sustainable so that it's affordable for the city to continue recycling. And so I'm happy to be here. I'm very excited. It looks like we've got about 27 participants on the call. So excited to talk about recycling. It's an evolving culture. So, we want to make sure that we keep giving residents, community members, all the information to make sure that it's in the future something that we can continue. So go to the next slide. And as Brian mentioned, so what happens, the City of Bel Air Public Works picks up your recycled containers at your home, and they bring those materials to our facility. And we call that facility a MRF, which means Material Recycle or Recovery Facility. So we take all of those materials and then we separate them into the different commodities. So before I go on, there's some things in the past that have really dominated and changed the way we do business. So back in 2017, China basically changed the way that we were going to do recycling by 2020. And so we started thinking, how are we going to do this as China exits the market? So China did not want to take our imports. They started realizing that mostly by the time they were receiving the material, they were full of contamination and they were basically trash. And so they demanded between 2018 and 2020 that we needed to get to 0.5% contamination. So at that time, we were about 25% contaminated. So meaning 1 in every 4 items that was recycled was contamination. So before, they really wanted volume, and they wanted to take everything. Well, then as the market changed, they started realizing their cost of taking that material and taking the trash out of it, that 25% was costing too much. And they decided the value of mixed paper and plastics wasn't something that they wanted to continue. So we really, as an industry, not just waste management, but everyone was impacted. And that really changed how we needed to do business going forward. And so this was pre-COVID, this was everything. So you can imagine when most materials were sent to China, now you have to create domestic markets. And what are you going to do with all of this recyclable material? So commodity prices started to drop. Not only that, did our other, other folks that we had sold materials for said, oh, by the way, China has decided to take 0.5% contamination. We want to do the same thing. So the whole market, we had to really drive education to our residents, to our businesses, to say we have to really start thinking about what we're putting in the recycle bins and get to a point that we need to get closer to that 0.5%. Now, 0.5% is really, really hard to do, especially when you have single stream recycling where everything goes into one bin, because it's easily to contaminate plastics and papers and glass and everything else when you mix it all. Things are getting broken. So how do you take those materials out and make sure that you're getting closer to that 0.5 contamination? So that kind of gives you a background of what happened. I'm happy to report as of today, most of the recycling is done in domestic markets. So China is out the mix. We do have stuff that is sent to Mexico, India, but for the most part, upward of 80% of all materials are in that domestic market. So go to the next slide. So with COVID and all the things that have changed with the China policies, we had to increase the technology of getting that material out of the stream. So, and what I mean by that is when the material comes to us and it is basically dumped on conveyor belts, how do we get the trash out of it so that when we ship the material, that it gets closer to that 0.5%. So technology has helped. We did have to increase kind of labor to put where the technology would not take out the garbage, because there's basically ways to sort all the material. But when you have stuff that shouldn't come in and it doesn't have the optics to pick it up as garbage, then you have to use manpower to be able to take things out of the conveyor belt that don't belong in that recyclable chain. And then markets have definitely changed. Demand has increased for certain products, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. But the number one thing that we really think can drive all this is education, and not just to the residents and the businesses, but industries. So how are they producing products? And when they're producing products, how do they go about making sure that at the end of that cycle of that product, it can be made into something else? So it has definitely shifted all of this. And with COVID, of course, you know, employees' safety was number one. So we had to pull back and have spacing between our employees at our MRFs. And then if we had any issues with COVID outbreaks, our labor force. So that all impacted all of this, but we found that we could make it work. I'm happy to report as well, during the past year, we did not have to shut down our MRF here in Houston at all. So we were able to adapt and change based on different policies that were coming down. Go to the next slide. So the top 3 2021 trends that are impacting recycling. So we have had policy and public demand for change. So what is driving that? Well, are there laws in place? And that's what we're seeing is they are starting to put laws that make sure that regulate folks to use certain products, to be more sustainable for the future and things like that. So you're seeing that industry could drive different materials. And then infrastructure investments. So with all the contamination issues and getting to that closer, upgrades are probably, most important to take the existing infrastructure that we have and make it fit to where it needs to be, to improve the qualities of what we're shipping out. And then in other areas, we're actually building new facilities. And when we're putting in those new facilities, we're adding more robotics to make sure that that upgrade to that material can take out a lot of the contamination that shouldn't be in the stream. And then the materials themselves, so the materials, also the demands. So we're going to talk about HDPE, which is one of the plastics, and we're going to talk about that later in a slide, but increasing recognition of limits of recycling. So we want to make sure that folks know what materials are that should be recycled, and then what are the values of those materials. And so we've seen that markets have improved on certain plastics. So that can actually drive what we're trying to communicate in the education part of it. So plastic makes up about 11% of the stream, but it's 5% of what we see as recycled. So how do we get it to closer to 100%? So we have room for growth there. I mean, we're letting 50% of the plastic basically not get recycled. So we're really trying to push a plastic recycling campaign to let folks know, because if we feel like if we weigh in on certain items, we can create a demand and be able to help the market to continue. All right, so go to the next slide. So when we looked back historically on our contamination rates, back from 2019 to the end of 2020, I said around 25%. And that was what we were seeing in the Houston area. But when we did a company-wide, back in the beginning of 2019, we were roughly about 21%. Beginning of January of 2020, we were roughly 21%. And all this time we've been pushing education. So we're trying to get it back to where we see the results. And of course, COVID began around March 2020, so we did have an increase in volume. But if you look at June, we started having back an increase in contamination. So we've really been working and tracking this because we have goals set that how we're going to reach the contamination levels that we want to see. I'm happy to report that Bel Air has been doing an amazing job. So we actually take our cities, our municipalities, and we look at contamination rates, because that gives us the information we need to provide to the city on how do we communicate and educate the residents of what we're seeing in our recycling streams, to be able to take those materials and educate homeowners that these are not recyclable materials. So back in 2020, we were roughly at 12% contamination in Bel Air. A lot of it was around plastic bags. bags of material that had recycle items. But what happens when we get those materials and they're in bags, especially if it's bags that we can't visibly tell it's recyclable material, we treat those as residue or garbage. So those are part of your contamination. So just with that communication, we were able, with the help of Public Works, to reduce that contamination from that 12% to more of a 55%, which is very, very close to that 0.5% that China and most of the industry was wanting to see in contamination. So when folks say it's impossible, I say, look at the city of Bel Air. But it's taken a lot of work with the folks that actually pick up the material to tag it, to not take material that's bagged. And so it's labor intensive to get that contamination level right, unless you have your homeowners participating and know what can go into the program. So the next slide. Oh, back one more. Oh. All right, so when we talk about audits and we get contamination levels, so we actually take loads from the city, and we take about 200 pounds when we're looking, once a month to see the contamination rates. We separate them out. They're done manually by labor, and we put the material, as you can see in this picture, basically on a table. And these different garbage bins have different materials. So you see the one that's labeled 11.6 HDPE color. The other ones, you can't see the labels, but they're all labeled with different materials. So each of the materials are separated out, and then we weigh those containers and see the weighted averages of the different commodities. So there's one for garbage, there's one for paper, there's one for plastic, the different types of plastics. And that's how we're able to feed the city information on a monthly basis. We also take pictures during this audit so we can actually show you visibly what we're seeing as the garbage or the contamination and what we consider, it's called residue. So go to the next slide. So this is a sample audit that was performed in March, and this is actually for the city of Bel Air. This was a stellar audit. It was 0% contamination. So if you look on the bottom lines where it says residue and it says unrecovered recyclable, plastic bags, residue, those three items make up contamination. So for this particular month, we had 0% contamination. This was like one of those, wow, this was a great one. Now, is it, when you say it's nearly impossible to get to 0%, you have to think too, it's based on weight. So if it didn't trigger any weight, then it would show up as 0. So another thing that is notable in this particular audit, when you're looking at the percentages of material that we're receiving, you see a line that says ONP, that is newspaper. So 42% or 42.8% of this particular audit contained newspaper. And why I think that's important is when you look to the right-hand side, you see that we have the different values, and it says a monthly index. So newspaper falls under the mixed paper value. While it's a lot and it's great and has a value of $35, it doesn't have the value that, say, the HDPE milk jug has. So you notice that that has $1,725 in value. And if you look at the audit, you only have 1% of milk jugs. So really what we're trying to get back to the cities is when you look at your cost of your program, the more value materials you can recycle, the better it's going to help you and the less cost. So how we price it to the cities when they're getting a blended value. So the more of the high value recyclables you send us, the less costs are involved. And so also when your contamination is higher, you notice the non-recyclables residue, it's costing us $41.95 to landfill that material that can't be recycled. So that is a chargeback instead of it's adding value to your recycling. So that's why we really try to tell folks that your contamination can cost you and can kind of take out that value of the stuff of material that you want to see recycled. Also on the value, you can see the plastics 3 through 7 have 0% value right now. So as much as we want to take those items, they're not giving any value. We have been able to take a few of the 3 through 7s and they're grouped together. Lately with new innovations and new MRFs, we're able to separate 3s, 4s, and do different things with those materials because we're finding markets are kind of opening up for different number of items. So that's what we're seeing. Another thing that aluminum and steel, that's one of the things that there's infinite amount of times that you can recycle those items. Whereas other items, such as paper, such as plastics, paper, the fiber eventually breaks down so many times. So after a while, paper, you can't recycle it at some point. Same thing with the plastics, depending on what type of plastic, those aren't infinitely recycled. But unlike, steel and aluminum, that's definitely something that you want to make sure is coming in your stream. And so when I look at the city of Bel Air, your steel is less than, it's 0.2% and 0.1%, and your aluminum is 0.2%. So there might be some avenues to work on those materials as well to increase that, because they never go away. And if folks are throwing them away, then they're never going to disappear in the landfill either. So that's something important to try to communicate and educate. And then one other topic that I always try to talk with cities about is glass. And a lot of folks ask, well, why in some cities do they take glass and then some cities they do not take glass? And the issue with glass is when it's recycled, it is broken purposely into like a fine sand granule. And it becomes an issue with contamination as well, because paper mixes in, different items mix in with it. And so the glass has to go through several processes to get the contamination out. And it actually costs to recycle glass. So we have to pay to actually have the glass taken to be recycled. So between your glass and your recyclables, if glass is 20%, and then if your contamination, went up, those are two items that you would have to pay for recycling, whereas the others add value. So I do see that there's a question up. Can cellophane be recycled? Can the plastic from packages of toilet paper and paper towels be recycled? So both of those are considered plastic film, and we do not want to accept those because they are basically tanglers to what we are trying to do. And so, no, we do not accept those as recyclable materials. And so those would, I think for the toilet paper and paper towels, for the outside of those, you can actually put those with your grocery bags and take them to the store. That would be the best avenue to recycle those. And there was one other question about aluminum foil with or without food residue. Anything, just keep this in mind, that we accept for recycling, we do not want it with food residue, regardless if it can be or can't be recycled. So for any type of material, it shouldn't be with food residue. But the difficult part about aluminum foil, when we look at aluminum, our system and our robotics are looking for more of a shape of a can shape for aluminum. So it's not actually measuring and looking for an aluminum foil. What I would say is, if you're trying to recycle the aluminum foil, if somehow you could put it with the aluminum that you have, that might be a little bit difficult to put it with a Coke can or something like that, but it's looking for that shape. So it might not necessarily pick up aluminum foil. All right, next slide. All right, so materials and markets. So residential volumes, they have remained high. Back when COVID and everyone was at home starting the beginning of March, the middle of March into April of last year, we basically saw everything that normally went from the restaurants where folks ate out to at home. So we had an increase in garbage. We also had an increase in recycling on both sides. So it's definitely something, you know, looking at Bel Air, we had a 11% increase in the recyclable materials because everything was showing up at the curbside residential. So it's important to know, when you're having that extra volume, there is the chance that you could have some extra contamination in with that. And then some of the material that people were picking up for to-go restaurants and things like that couldn't be recycled. And then everyone, it seemed like, was doing online shopping. So we did have an increase of your cardboard, the OCC. And so those are things that we totally identified in the market. And then when we talk about cardboard, it had an 80%, it was sold in the domestic markets compared to 63% 3 years ago. And that's even increasing this year. So I look for that 80% number to rise since this presentation was given. None of the plastics that we get in recyclables is processed or exported. So it's all going domestic. So everything plastic is staying here in the States, which is great. And so we're not using domestic, you know, everything is domestic, and it's because of, with the price of plastics and the value, especially at 0%, we're really trying to increase the value of some of the other plastics other than HDPE. So I had a few other questions. So crushed aluminum cans, yes. I mean, sometimes we have to, the sensors will have to check. We also have magnets and blowers on the line. So some of the materials, depending, not necessarily aluminum, but depending upon what type of materials, that goes through different avenues besides just how it works. Bubble wrap shipping packages, please no bubble wrap. So for the aluminum foil, would it be best to make it, ball it up onto a recognizable shape so that it's there's no food residue? Yes, agreed. That would definitely help with that as well. Paper labels on cans need to be removed. No, they do not. So when they're actually sent to be recycled, they go through another and they're able to remove it. So it doesn't have to be removed. In the beginning, when recycling started, you know, they wanted all the labels off, even in the water bottles, in glass, and labels do not have to be removed. Next slide. Another question while we're going to the next slide, plastic bottles with or without lids. And so this has been back and forth, controversial. It always is a question when I do these that come up. The issue with the bottles without the lids, if you try to recycle without the lid on and you just put the lid in your container, the lid a lot of times will drop as residue and not get recycled. Whereas if you keep the lid on, even if it is a different material, it'll actually get recycled. So we encourage folks to keep the lids on. Anything that's kind of less than, think about it as a sticky note. And I have one like right here. So if it's kind of less than this size, it has an issue getting recycled. So we definitely want to try to keep the lids on if all possible. Milk jugs, crushed or not, it really doesn't matter. We crush them once they're at the facility, but up until that point, it doesn't matter if they're crushed or not. Another question, do laundry detergent bottles need to be rinsed out? They don't need to be rinsed. I would just kind of ensure that the liquid is out of it, but they don't necessarily have to be rinsed out. All right. So on the recycle right, I have a few of just common items on the screen. And really we try to say, if it doesn't fit into these categories, then don't try to wish recycle it. So we would rather stick to these items that we know we have an end market to, and we call it recycling back to the basics. So it's not something we need to guess at every day. We try to use these same materials because if everyone just recycled these materials, such as plastic bottles and containers, food and beverage cans, paper, cardboard, bottles, glass, then we can make a huge impact instead of getting all the materials that we really have a hard time trying to determine if there's something that we can do with the materials. So we really try to ask folks to go back to the basics. Also, if you notice, I have a link that Brian's going to connect to their website. So we have developed a Recycle Right webpage. And so if there's any type of items that you're looking or have questions, or maybe you want to bring recycling to the workplace, we offer our website that is for consumers to be able to use for your home, for your business. And it gives you all kinds of helpful tips of items that can be recycled, what shouldn't be in your container. You can chat with us, ask us questions. There's education material for schools on this website. So there's many avenues of resources that we try to give commonly asked questions to help people to really understand the program. And there's also flyers that you could have that may be for your children, for the materials that you're putting at your house. So you can go over. A lot of times our children are the best recyclers because they're learning it in schools. I know mine at home come home and, Mom, what about this? Or, oh, did you know about this? So we really were trying to allow this website to be an education tool for folks that if there's something that's strange that comes up because new products are hitting the market every day, we hope to have answers on the website to be able to help with those. All right, Brian, if you can bring us back to the slideshow. And then I have a few questions here. Should metal clips, staples, and tape be removed from cardboard? They don't necessarily have to be. So you can leave those in and it will be okay on the cardboard. When the new recycle day will be.
We'll have to get back to that one. I'm not sure what she means by that.
Okay.
What they mean by that.
Okay. All right, cleaning containers with spray nozzles. Do we leave the sprayer on or off? Some have springs in the sprayer. So I would say if it has the springs in the sprayer, I would leave it off because it's not plastic and it's metal. So I would say leave them off unless you can take the spring out of it before you recycle it. Should we stop recycling glass if it isn't profitable? That is definitely a great question. A lot of cities debate that, and it's really up to what the constituents want to do, and especially the amount of volumes. So it's definitely something we get a lot of, but you have to weigh the cost and determine if it's something that your residents want to see. Or a lot of times too, that glass weighs more than just normal garbage. So even when they say we want to, treat it as garbage and landfill it, then there is a cost involved in landfilling glass. So you just have to weigh it if it makes sense to your program. So it's kind of a case by case, depending if the cities want to continue to recycle it. Can you recycle the plastic that strawberries and blueberries come in? I'm guessing you're meaning like the green, containers, and it would definitely depend on the type of plastic. So, or you're talking about the clear plastics. So I would say a yes on those. But without knowing exactly what container it is, it's kind of, one of those things. If it has one of the numbers on it, and if it's a sturdy plastic, then probably yes. Is category one?
If I can chime in real quick, if this is what you're talking about with the blueberries and strawberries, by the way, this is a positive doing these things at home. You can have these to bring up. But this right here, if you look on the very bottom, is 1. And if you look on the strawberries, they're typically 1 or 2 as well. But if it's anything that this shape, a lot of times if you look at the bottom, sometimes it takes a little work. You can find a little symbol. In this case, it's right here, which you can't see. But to answer your question, if they come in something like this, then they would be recyclable.
Perfect. Is category 1 plastic recyclable? What about plastic windows on envelopes and the like? Yes, plastic 1 is recyclable. The plastic window on the envelopes, I believe years ago, people took the plastic off and said, we're tearing this off of the envelope. Now, we're not requiring that those plastic be removed, just keep it with the paper. But one thing that I would say is if you do start removing the plastic windows on envelopes, no, that's considered plastic film, and we do not recycle that. Okay, if the lid of a plastic cup from a fast food place says PS6 or PP5, can that be recycled with the City of Bel Air? No, it cannot be. Can mixed paper be placed in paper grocery bags, or should it simply be placed in the bin? Great question. It can be placed in the grocery bags. You also might want to put a note on the outside of the bag so that someone's not thinking it's garbage, that just says paper inside or something like that, so it's not getting treated as garbage and they don't have to open it up. But yes, paper can go in the paper grocery bags. Next question, is the plastic that holds food inside of box items like plastic wrap around crackers that come inside of a box and bag inside of box cereal recyclable? No, we consider that plastic film or a bag, and no, we do not want to recycle that. Shredded paper, great question. This comes up quite often. It's not that we can't recycle the paper, it's the size of it. And so what happens is that shredded paper, when it's brought into us or delivered to us in the truck and then dumped on the conveyor belt, all those little shredded paper pieces are eliminated across everything that we're receiving. So it might get in with the plastics, it might get in with the glass. And so it becomes more of a contamination issue than anything. And a lot of it falls through our system and becomes residue. So that's why we say no to shredded paper, just because of the contamination to the other materials that we're receiving. Glossy or waxed paper. So typically not glossy or wax paper, but if you're talking about like carton containers, like orange juice cartons that have that wax paper, then yes, we can take those. But if you're just talking about paper in general, no. I already answered the shredded paper. Can we recycle gift wrapping paper and tissue paper? That depends. And the reason I say it depends, so when you're thinking about the holidays, check the labels of the paper you're purchasing, because if it's one of the shinier wrapping papers, then no. But if it says made from recyclable material and it's kind of like a flat paper, then yes, it can be recycled. Same thing with the tissue paper. It just depends on what type of tissue paper. So a lot of times it's a no, but sometimes, it can be. I will leave the recycle bins at the baseball fields to the city. That's something that's a commercial container. Typically, if you put out at one of the baseball fields. What about things with a plug? Maybe, for example, a toaster, would that be recycled? Absolutely not. Anything like that would not, it might be recycled somewhere else or upcycled, but those type of appliances, we never want to receive anything that has any type of electronics. So that would not be recycled in this particular program.
On that note, I would use this as an opportunity to bring up that if you do have electronics that need to be recycled, we have an event on June 12th, which is not too far away. And we typically will have these twice a year to take things like electronics or paper that you would like to be shredded, or any metal as well. So that event will be on June 12th. It will be at Condit, and you should see some more information on the city website. But anything with a plug, anything that's electronic, metal, things that we wouldn't normally take, we'll be taking that day.
Perfect. And Mickey, I apologize. I skipped, you submitted your question earlier at the beginning. What happens to the recycling when we have heavy rains and everything is soaked? Great question, because we want dry items. And if it is saturated in water, especially like cardboard, paper, it gets downgraded, and sometimes it has to be treated as trash. I mean, we do have blowers if it's slightly wet, but when it's soaked, if all possible, I would think about not putting those items in your container. So your paper and cardboard, especially like on the last week when it almost rained every day. If you can take those items and hold them for a week and just, recycle your plastic bottles, food containers, your glass, I would recommend that. Because if we do have a whole lot of wet materials, it will be downgraded and considered contaminant. Can AC filters be recycled? No, they cannot in our program. We talked about milk containers and milk cartons. Yes, they can be recycled. Plastic spoons and forks, no. Can I recycle metal lids from glass jars? Yes, it depends on size. So some of the smaller size metal lids They drop through our facility. You can definitely try to recycle them, and you can leave them on the jars. It doesn't matter, because the jars will break, and they will break too off of the glass jar. So it's not necessary to just have them loose either. What about batteries? So batteries are recyclable, but not through this program and not putting them into the bin. So there's other avenues to recycle batteries, but not through your curbside recycling program. I think maybe Best Buy actually takes batteries and you can recycle them. There's some other programs that you can actually buy envelopes and mail the batteries in to be recycled. So there's different avenues to recycle them. Plastic jug with aluminum screw top. Again, it's going to depend on the size of the top, but of course the plastic jug can be recycled, and just depending on the size of the top for that, I would say to separate it, since it's not plastic though. Okay. Going on to the next slide. So, one of the things that, when Brian and I were discussing this, he was asking me, what products have the most value? And interesting enough, the milk jugs, the HDPE, and we call this natural because it doesn't have any color, have doubled since last year. So I know earlier in the slide, we showed the value of that material. So we are really, really, really trying to encourage folks, because we see very small percentages of milk jugs. And I don't know if some folks aren't, they're using more cartons than they are HDPE milk. I know at home I use a lot of soy and different type, and a lot of those are in more of a carton than a jug. So, that might be consumers as well driven. But we're seeing that, again, like PET, that value has doubled as well since last year. And that's, PET is a lot of your water bottles as well. And then, so it's crazy to think that a milk jug has more value than what you would think of steel or aluminum, right? But that's definitely, now the weight also is a factor when you look at percentages. So sometimes it can be misconceiving that you might be getting a lot of milk jugs, but they don't weigh a whole lot as well. So when you see that the percentages, it's all weight driven on the values. So because everything is determined by weight instead of necessarily, they take up this amount of space. Let's see. Please, can you say again if milk cartons, OG cartons, soy milk cartons are recyclable or not? Yes, they are. Cartons are recyclable. They just don't have any value, but they are recycled. So back to giving plastics a second command or second life. So we are really advertising and making sure, and so probably some of the strawberry containers or blueberry containers, you see some containers that are in here. We are taking those, so yogurt containers, even, when you think about your house, I mean, a lot of folks forget that, your bathroom, you have your shampoo, conditioner bottles, you may have face wash that's in a container. Those are recyclable. We tend to think about just the kitchen items or what we're seeing because it's closer to our garbage can, and maybe you have two containers in your kitchen, where your bathroom, you may only have one container, and oh, I don't want to bring my shampoo container to my recycle container, wherever it might be. So we've really been trying to get folks to think outside of the kitchen, your laundry room, where you have your detergent bottles. Those are your HDPE colored containers. So because they have color, like this red container with a blue lid versus your milk jugs, those are two different. So one of the questions came in, what products do recycled plastic end up in? If we increase demand for these products, it will help with the recycle market. So plastic can be made into fiber. So some clothing is made into actual out of water bottles. So carpet can be made out of plastic. So there's all different avenues for different plastics that change into. And then other items are actually made out of other plastics. So it just depends on what type of plastic and different materials. Do plastics need to be washed before recycling? So great question. They don't need to be squeaky clean, but they do need to be, for the most part, clean and not have a lot of food waste or liquids, soda or milk, just to keep the other materials clean. Because if it does have leftover residue in it and it's, spilled out and then it gets on the paper products, it causes issues. So we really want to make sure it's empty and dry and not with liquids or food waste. On the compost, okay, Brian got that one. Are plastic pots and trays from spring planting recyclable? Most that I have seen and personally used myself are not. For the most part, I would definitely check if it has a number on it, but for the most part, I haven't seen a lot of the plant pots that can be. How about the face wash shampoo that comes in toothpaste shaped containers? I'm trying to think back. I think for the most part, no on those. I'm trying to think of different ones that I've seen over the years, and for the most part, those cannot be. Peanut butter plastic, does it need to be rinsed, or does it need rinsing? That's a great question, because peanut butter is hard to get out of. If you can get most of the peanut butter, it's easier to use a knife and scrape around the outside and scrape more than rinsing gets it off. So I would say get it as clean as possible, and then you can recycle that. Empty, clean gallon paint or varnish cans. This is a difficult one because you don't want to really advertise paint or varnish as coming into the recycle, and so that's a tough one that if it was squeaky clean and then there was no paint left on it, I would say yes. But you want to be careful, because a lot of folks would then just start throwing paint cans out. And so I would caution on that. Sorry I was late. Can styrofoam be recycled? So at our facility, we do not recycle styrofoam. I think there's one location in Houston that might accept styrofoam, but styrofoam can be recycled. It just takes large quantities of styrofoam to make it valuable. And we just don't have the spacing to collect all the recycling that we could in this particular program to accept it. And our facility doesn't accept it. So that's the issue with styrofoam. It takes a whole lot of material to make it recyclable. Spray cans, if they're split open, no. I read that only 9% of plastic is actually recycled. What are your thoughts on this? So I would say if we're looking at plastics as a whole, it goes back to, is there an end market, and are folks willing to make them into recyclable material. So that might be the case. That's why, there's no value between those 3 through 7s, and that we're constantly looking into those markets of maybe separating out some of those to find value. And so we're hoping that we change that, but there has to be an end market for it to make sense. So that just because something says it's recyclable or it's plastic, if it doesn't have another life to it, then really it just sits, and we don't have a way of having someone that's willing to purchase that material, because there's not an end product that it's going to change into. All right, next slide. So when we go back, we really talk about contamination, and we just try to stick to the basics. So if we talk about, is it a bottle, is it a can, is it paper, or is it if it's cardboard? So does it fit into those classifications? If it doesn't, then it's probably like something that's taken into this program. If it's food or a liquid, we do not want it because that causes contamination. And then no loose plastic bags or bagged recycling. So a lot of folks want to bag their recycling, thinking they're keeping it clean, thinking that they're doing us a favor by having it all together. But actually it's doing worse, because the whole idea behind our MRF is everything we want to take in loose. That way it can go with the right stream. So we want the paper to be able to get with the paper. If we had something that was bagged, it wouldn't be able to separate it out without someone actually physically having to decide if that's bagged garbage or if that's bagged recycling. And that's a safety issue that we're afraid of, having employees open bags, because we never know what's in them. So we treat all bagged recyclables as garbage. Next slide. If containers have to be dry, how can they dry if we leave the lids on? I'm thinking water bottles. So as you empty your water bottle and you get all the water out, and you basically, even if you kind of shook the bottle to get the water out and then left the lid on, it should stay relatively dry. Can deep pressure cans like hairspray bottles be recycled if the recycle symbol's on them? For the most part, if it's deep pressured, I would say yes. We just have to be careful, because some of them has caused issues of receiving those. We put our recycling in brown paper bags that are open on the top. Is that okay? Yes, it is, because normally if it goes into the bag, it will get dumped and it wouldn't be treated as a bag. The only time is if for some reason that bag, when it went into the back of the truck and it got compacted, and then all of that material that's in it got trapped into that grocery bag, it might not be loose, and might not some of the product, if it's plastics with that grocery bag that got stuck in there, that might become an issue. So that's why we really try to say loose items. So I get the question all the time, why not plastic bags? Plastic bags are meant, and the best way that they can get recycled is to bring them back to the grocery stores. And I know with COVID that folks are having groceries delivered and things like that. So, and some folks don't want to go back to the grocery stores. But what happens if they come in with the materials, they become a tangler to our machinery. So it shuts down our whole conveyor belt system. And these folks spend hours trying to get the tanglers, the plastic bags, from wrapping up into our system. So where this is supposed to bring the materials and keep them going and going and going to the next avenue where they should go, instead the plastic bags and even plastic film, if it's sent in, or wires or coat hangers, those all end up in what we have, these star discs, and you can see it on the bottom right, but they tangle up. And so we have to have manual labor to remove them. But in the process, we shut down our whole facility. And so it doesn't do it, it's a safety issue, and then it causes harm to our equipment, and it can damage permanently some of the equipment. So that's why we say no plastic bags. So the best bet is put all your plastic bags in one bag and bring them back to the grocery store the next time you go shopping, if all possible. All right, next slide. So what are we learning to guide the future? So, I mean, we have data that we collect on our end to determine, what kind of new products are being made, but also what are they being made with? So when I've discussed end markets matter, it is a real big deal because a lot of material is out there that possibly could be recycled, but if it's not recycled into a new product and we're just taking it, it's not recycling. So we want to make sure that the materials we're telling homeowners that we can accept, we have an end market to make it recyclable. We don't want a misconception of, oh, we can take this material, we can take that material, but really there's no one that is making a new product for it. So otherwise that wouldn't be recycling. We want to continue, domestic markets are preferable. So we want to keep materials within the US. It helps on cost, shipping costs, that we don't have to ship overseas, that we can keep these materials here in the domestic markets, and it helps the economy. Not everything can be recycled, so we've talked about that. So multi-layering packaging small items are problematic, and processing is expensive. So we've seen folks are getting a lot of Amazon packages, and so when they have other layers of packaging, whether it's styrofoam or plastic or whatever it may be, a lot of those are not recyclable. So, and back to the small items. So if it's kind of less than a Post-it note size, it becomes an issue of what avenues that it ends up in and causes contamination in different streams. And then not all recyclables have the same environmental benefits. So we've talked about, paper, metal, glass avoids emissions by using less virgin material, which is where the emissions are. So, and then food waste is best prevented to avoid emissions. So big, not that we take any food in this program, but we're looking at, talking with restaurants and trying to eliminate that. Around the holidays, there's a ton of food waste. Thanksgiving to Christmas time, it's just unbelievable how much food waste that people generate. So you have to weigh in the emissions, you have to weigh in the value of the material, and then bottom line, there has to be an end market. That is what's driving, is it recyclable? Because if there's not an end market, we really we can't take it. I mean, that, we wouldn't be doing a favor to the program by saying, hey, we want this, but it doesn't have anywhere to go. It doesn't make sense. All right, so we have a few more questions regarding no paper shredding. I was told in the past that only if it goes on closed cardboard boxes, is that okay? Again, with the paper shredding, if that box is opened and that paper is really tiny, it's probably going to drop through the system. So, and then, or it's going to get in with everything else. So paper shredded does become an issue. Yes, paper can be recycled, but it's the small pieces that become an issue. So if you have, information you don't want to share, and, there's a way that you can, use a black marker and share your confidential information, then I think that would probably be better than shredding some of the paper. I know that's not all possible because sometimes there's a lot of confidential information you don't want anyone to be able to get. But if you can avoid some of the paper shredding, or maybe the bigger paper, look at some of your paper. Some folks just shred everything, but if you only, if you eliminate some of the items that don't need to be shredded, is a possibility. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Derwin, for the nice comment. Oh, great comment too. I put my shredded paper into my compost. That's a great one. All right, next slide. All right, so I know I answered questions, and hopefully I didn't go, too fast, and we answered all the questions, but I'm open for, any question. I think someone raised their hand during the session. So I want to make sure, Debbie Williams, I can allow you to talk. Hi, Debbie. I have allowed you to speak. I know you have your hand raised, so feel free to comment.
While we're waiting, I just want to remind everybody that yes, this session was recorded, and that I will go back and I'll show you again how to see this session as well as the other session that we have done. This is the City of Bel Air website. If you go to City Services, and then you go to Public Works, and then you scroll down and you will see the ESB Learning Academy. You click on that. Here's where you will see the recordings of the presentations we've done. So the first one we did was on solar power. You can watch that here. Within a couple of days, this presentation will be in the same spot. So if you missed something, or maybe you just want to hear something one more time, you can go back and watch it. Or if someone that wasn't able to make it, just point them here and they'll be able to watch the whole presentation here. And then also wanted to remind everybody again, the citywide recycling event will be on June 12th at Condit.
Well, right. Again, I want to say thank you for the city for organizing this. Definitely, each of you make a big difference. Bel Air is one of our favorite customers because contamination is extremely low. I know that when we started talking with the city last year, 12%, they were concerned. Most cities that we have in the area are around 25%. So I want to say kudos to everyone from Public Works to residents, all of the above, because it really makes a difference. So I appreciate all the hard work. I'm ecstatic that all of you were here today, and that that it was great that on a Saturday that 30 at least 30 participants were interested and wanted to know more about what you all can do better for recycling. So I do appreciate that. It takes all of us to make this sustainable for our future, for our children. It's the right thing to do. It's costly to recycle because there's a lot of processes in place, and it's not just taking material and not having to separate it, but really it takes getting the right material to make sure we can continue it on for the future. Brian, I see there's a few questions that maybe you can answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anonymous, I actually responded incorrectly. So yes, you can come to the event, on the recycling event on June 12th. And it looks like is there any more questions?
So thanks so much for your time. May we post the slides on our social media sites. There's information on the website that you can share. I really wouldn't want to post the whole presentation on social media. Some of this is, city specific, so I would prefer not, but anything on our website, there's information you can share, so feel free to share that. I like John's comment, seeing the conveyors helps me understand why some things are not acceptable. Exactly. Sometimes we say it, or a lot of times everybody wants to see the why. And I think it's really important once you see, that everything gets shut down and it tangles, it kind of makes people understand why the plastic bags are a huge issue. Even coat hangers, garden hoses, all those become tanglers. Let me see if there's any other questions. Listing on the next door, Bel Air. Let me get back to the city and on that about putting it on the next door, and then I'll answer if that's okay or not.
Yeah, we can get back to you. I mean, because the presentation is actually recorded, you might be able to share the link to the presentation, because that's going to be on the city's website. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody again. Because we had you register this event, we are going to send out a short survey. It might be 3 or 4 questions. Please take the time to answer it. We're going to ask you things like, what would you like to hear in the future? Did you find this interesting? What other topics would you like to hear? So if you can just spend a few minutes and answer some quick questions, we'd really appreciate it. Again, I want to thank you for spending part of your Saturday with us. If you have any more questions, please feel free to contact any member of the Environmental Sustainability Board. And thank you again, Shana. This has been great.
Thanks.